Greg, can you remind me of your surname?
Edwards.
Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. All right.
Hi, Greg.
Hi, sir. How are you?
I'm tickety boo.
Looking very smart today.
Always have to make an effort, you know.
I can't believe you can't hear that thunder, Adrian.
Yes.
I might be able to hear it. Obviously, I've got expensive double glazing case.
I'm in Wallasey and I can hear it here.
It's bounced.
Where are we up to, Sue?
We'll definitely core it. We'll definitely core it.
Oh, do you think we're in a position to start yet, or have we still got people in the lobby?
No, people come in automatically. I don't keep them in the lobby. I'm very kind.
Yeah. Actually not in the room.
So they're just joining as they come in. At least if they are in the lobby, I don't know. No, I don't keep them in the lobby.
Do we have any guests from outside forum for this one, Sue?
We have some guests that are speaking, so officers, and we have a number of the public. We have 3. I think I'm not sure how many have joined. 1. I think 2 have joined so far.
Okay,
but
so
I think we've had requests from 3.
Okay, so it's just worth going through the protocols so that people understand if they're observing, they shouldn't raise their hand and they shouldn't contribute to the conversation. I'll do that right at the beginning of the meeting. So if we, I can't see anybody waiting to come in. Oh.
No, sorry, I'll share the papers.
Okay. So if I can start by welcoming everybody. I know we're a couple of minutes late, so excuse us for that. We love technology, especially when it works. So if I can just start by drawing everybody's attention to the protocols of this meeting, as it is an online meeting. If everybody could turn their videos and mics off so that we can maintain the best possible coverage, apart from people who are speaking or asking questions. And if you want to ask a question, if you use the raise your hand icon on the toolbar, and if anybody's struggling to that, if you can just use the message function to indicate that you want to ask a question. And Sue, could you monitor that the question bar for me if I try to keep my eyes on where the hands are up? Is that okay for everybody? And I'd just like to remind everybody that this is a public meeting, so please be clear around your questions and your responses. And if those members of the public who are observing, please understand that although that you're more than welcome to be party to this, it isn't within your remit to ask questions at this meeting. Is there anything I've forgotten there, Sue, in terms of protocol?
I think that's it.
Okay. In terms of apologies, I have apologies from Simone White, who is unable to be here but assures us of her presence in future meetings. So if that can be noted. Do we have any other apologies, Sue?
I've had a number of people who have said they can't attend the meeting, but I'll include those on the minutes.
Fantastic.
That's okay.
That's fine. And given that we aren't in a physical meeting, if you could just introduce yourself as you're presenting or asking a question, that would be helpful. As you can see from my icon, I have suddenly assumed the persona of my wife according to the list, but I am actually Adrian Whiteley. So, and some of those, some of your names on screen may not actually represent who you are. So if you are asking a question, just introduce yourself and your role before asking the question. And similarly with the people who are presenting, if you can do that as you present, that keeps everything fine. Okay, so if we can then, I'm presuming everybody is in now. If we can follow those protocols, and if we can start then on item 2, and we'll do matters arising as they scroll through. So if we can scroll down to page, wherever we are, see whatever, item 2, page 1. If you just scroll down slowly, and if anybody wants to raise their hand to any questions, anything from point 4, point 5. Okay, scroll down again, please, Sue. Point 6. We have a presentation from the early years group as well, or about early years anyway. So anything from that? No. Okay, point 7.
Oh,
Okay.
God, we've got the rain here now, Adrian. I can hardly hear you.
I hear, but you can hear the thunder behind me. Maybe that's an omen of things to come later in the meeting. If we can just carry on through there. Anything on 8? Okay, thank you. Scroll down again to page 4. That will be discussed. So I know there are some questions about that. So if we can come to that later in the meeting. School budget is also on the meeting. Anybody want to make any notes on that? Excellent. Page 5. The de-delegation is also on the agenda, so we can pick that up when it comes. We move on to item 12, next page. Oh, no, that's just somebody joining the meeting. Any questions on that? Excellent. 13, anything on school balances? Also covered. Budget monitoring, if we can scroll down again to page 7. Excellent. Just as we read through, if anything. No, and then we are at forum membership. Sue, where are we with forum membership? Are we fully membered up?
No, I think we are still struggling with academy reps, but we have got a change in the non-teaching rep. Why has his name gone out my head? I was dealing with it a few minutes ago. But Jill, thank you, Jill. Jill Harris is taking the place of Steve. So, but we'll do that formally because I've only just very recently found out about that. But we are still struggling for academy vacancies. So I'll update membership the June meeting.
Okay, so Jill, who is joining us, welcome. Steve's a hard act to follow, but I'm sure you'll be wonderful. Okay, if we can then go to item 4, which is a report from the Home Education Service, and I think that is Julie.
Hi everybody, I hope you can all hear me. I've also got rain behind me in Mel's, so apologies if there's any disturbance. So I'm the interim manager for the Home Education Service as from October half term last year, and I'm here to just go through some changes in the charges to schools. So just for anybody who is unfamiliar with the service, the Home Education Service.
Sorry, can I just stop a minute?
Yeah.
Adrian, I've forgotten to set the record. So I'm going to do that now. I do apologise.
Do you want me to start
this
again?
rain, it's completely thrown me. No, just introduce yourself again. I'll start the recording now.
Okay.
Sorry.
Cheers, Julie. Sorry about that.
All right.
Sorry about that,
It's okay.
Julie.
Hey, I feel like I'm in a proper film now. Cameras action. Okay, so hi everybody, I'm Julie Hudson. Some of you might recognise my face from other roles in the authority, but today I'm here as the home education, the interim head for home education, which has been a lovely position for me to take on. I will talk today about some proposed changes to the school charges. But prior to doing that, just to make sure everybody understands that the home education service is an alternative provision for the youngsters that we have that can't get to school because of their health needs. In the past, that has been a mixture of physical health needs and mental health needs, although in recent years it's been more about the students who have mental health needs. And because of that, we are seeing a lot of them staying longer with the service rather than just come in on a short-term basis, get better and return to their schools. So that's been a fairly big change. Something like 70% of referrals come with supporting letters from CAMS. So it being an alternative provision, the way that the current budget is set up is that it provides for the first 12 weeks or a term without any charges to the schools from the base budget. After that, there is weekly charge to the schools until we get to year 11 when the ORPU transfers to the base. So that's the current arrangements. In terms of the paper I put forward, I also gave a little bit of background about the review that is currently underway, looking at how we need to mobilise, respond and modernise the service. So that is afoot, but today's paper is mainly about the charges to schools. Probably an opportunity to mention the effect of COVID on the service. We saw fewer referrals in the first lockdown, but coming out of the second lockdown, there has, as you would understand, to be a surge of referrals as the youngsters try to get back into schools and the social and academic demands increase on them. So we are seeing quite a big surge in referrals. There has also been a lot of what I would call the older pupils, the year 11s and year 12s left with us. Again, a legacy from the first lockdown, not being able to move the young people onto their next destinations. So we've been working hard about that, and with that, and out of the year 12 pupils, I think almost entirely have got destinations this year. So that's the effect of COVID. In terms of the budget position, there was an overspend, which wasn't agreed, and that's partially what's prompted the paper today, so that we can talk to schools about the slight increase in charges. So the second part there talks about what's in place now. So for the first term, there is no charge to schools. That's taken up by the base budget, as I would call it. And thereafter, after the 12 weeks, schools are charged £80 a week. And that's been the case, I think, for 7 years. There has been no increase. And jokingly, you don't get much for £80 in today's world. So the is to increase this to £125 a week, and that, colleagues, is in line with the other alternative provisions. If you think that the academic element of the day is usually 2 hours in many of the other provisions, they're there to do vocational things as well. So that's the main change to school charges, the increase from £80 a week to £125 a week. That's £25 a day. And I would say that, but I think that we are really worthy of that. I see some great work going on, and I know we work with some families that are really vulnerable to the extent that they can't leave their house, they can't leave their bedrooms. So that's the proposal for the changes. The only other change is for the year 11s. So in year 11, it gets very difficult for the pupils to return to their school, even if they do have a change in their health, because then they're on the trajectory for their exams. So the ORPU for the year 11s has been being transferred over to the service for a considerable amount of years. And I'm asking for that to continue, but I'm also asking for the pupil premium for any pupils in year 11 who attract that to come with them. And this is so that we can add into our offer some enrichment activities. so that we can prepare them to move forward with the maths and the English and the academic successes that they've gained with us, but also to try to move them forward in terms of their social skills and their ability to move forward and have successful transitions into wherever that may be. So that, in essence, is the two changes. I'm asking for the weekly charge to schools to be increased from £80 to £125 a week, and for the year 11s to come with their pupil premium. The difference that will make to the service is about, I think it's on the current figures, there's about 100 children with us at the moment, to make the maths easy. It would increase by about 13,000 on the budget, and on this year's year 11 figures, it would give us about £10,000 to put on some enrichment activities. And I would propose that those changes come into place from the 1st of April, and then we can charge from the next academic year. And that's about it from me, unless anyone's got any questions.
Thanks, Julie. Has anybody got any questions? I think it's worth pointing out, Julie, that this still comes in at less than the ORPU for a child in full-time education at your establishment.
That's right, it is.
And I think that was well received by the secondary heads and principals at WASH. Has anybody got any further comments? Anybody have any feelings other than to agree to this? If you could just raise your hand and let me know. Otherwise, excellent. Thank you, case, everyone. Cheers. Thank you, Julie. Sue, I think, does this need a vote, or is this just to note?
I think the way the recommendation is worded, it's just to note.
Okay, so
she's just saying that the fees are increasing.
Okay, in that case, can we consider that this point is noted? Thank you very much, Julie.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So if we can move on to the next item 5, which is the early years report, and that is Carol.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to give you an overview of the early years report. I'll take the report as read and move to the main aspects of the report, which is outlining there in 2.1 the early years budget at the end of 2021, and outlining an underspend of 290,400. It also then breaks down into the categories of where that accumulation has come from, which the central costs, early years funding entitlement. The funding entitlement of 182,963 comes from where the percentage take-up of provision for your 2s, 3s and 4s and extended hasn't actualised what would have been the estimated in order to pull the funds through from central government. And that is anticipated given the year we've had going through the COVID period. And the Disability Access Fund is a fund that is eligibility through the child receiving DLA, Disability Living Allowance, and that's a fund also that has an underspend of 45. So the proposal and recommendations is for the full 290,400 be carried forward for use across activities in 21-22. The central cost has a breakdown of some activity that was planned for the towards the end of 2021, and we're moving into lockdown 3. Unfortunately, there was some delay in moving those activities on. So there are plans in place, and there's in the main looking at bringing some business support on board for sustainability of provision across through future proofing their provision. The presenting needs that has brought us to focus on further activity should it be agreed in principle, and it is in principle because it hasn't been confirmed until the Department for Education closes down all budgets. Is the presenting needs are our take-up of 2-year-olds is struggling to come back to a realised point pre-COVID. Other areas are showing good signs of improvement, and we have a high number of all providers open and engaged with families. But the 2-year offer is just taking some time to come back, and given that this is a funding element for our vulnerable children across Wirral, we're key to deploy some activity in that area. And the other presenting needs are, as outlined in the tables, if we look at the SEND table and we look at the Disability Access Fund, our high increase of children needed additional support that's known to the early years SEND team, and it's around building some capacity, not just within the early years SEND team, but working with our partners and providers in building early years SEND capacity as an early years system. And there's a key piece of work that we're wanting to engage in around transitions and supporting parents having their confidence in taking up not only their entitlements, but moving on to school and ready for those transitions into reception, and supporting children in schools and identify what will be needed. So that there's also areas of work there outlined around a school readiness campaign and how we support with resources for children moving into school. The Disability Access Fund in 5.5, we have continually, and thank you to the School Forum in doing so, secured the underspends moving forward. And this year there was 176 in underspend that we've deployed out through an application process for providers and settings to where they need to enhance their reasonable adjustments, and it could be in response to the situation with COVID. So we want to further make a proposal to continue to carry forward and protect the Disability Access Fund for similar purposes. Point 6 there gives some outlines of workforce developments and continued practice through the early years teams in relation to most of what I've said there, supporting children through the SEN, supporting children to be ready for school, supporting children around the speech, language and communication needs, and a big piece of work there in the early years foundation stage reforms for the sector. So to summarise, the paper is, the recommendations are that we carry forward the full underspend as totaling 290,400, of which the 45 is actually within the Disability Access Fund element, and that is, as I said, all in principle, and ideally once we get that confirmed later in the summer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Carol. That's an excellent report. So thank you very much for the clarity of that report. And I think we'll all like to express our own concern for your sector. It's been hit, I think, very hard by the COVID pandemic and all of the actions you had to take to stay open over last year when a lot of other sectors were closed down. So I think that's well worth praise. The other bit is just to explain to everybody in forum the idea of the in principle ring fencing, because of course that may be subject to some clawback at some stage. So we are asking for an in principle agreement for a sum that may or may not exist at some stage in the future. Has anybody got any other comments or questions for Carol? I have a question from Roy.
Hi, thanks. Can I ask whether we are content that we have enough provision for children with additional needs in the early foundation stage? And it seems anecdotally that the number requiring support is growing irrespective of COVID, and I wonder whether additional provision is necessary.
Thank you, Roy. I think to answer in the main from the early years perspective on that, working with private and voluntary and independent sector, we do focus on inclusion and work to ensure that children can stay within the provision that take up with their funded entitlements. And we've done a lot of work around upskilling the workforce. So we have special educational coordinators now in a high number of our settings that can do that work to support that stay within the settings. But in terms of the actual specialist provision, then I would have to take that to talk and discuss with our colleagues across within the SEND and James Assistant Director for Education in having a full overview of that. But I think to answer in the main is we have a higher number of practitioners that are able to support and keep children within their mainstream early years setting.
Hi, Roger. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. And any more questions for Carol on that? Excellent. Roy, can you lower your hand, please, unless you've got another question? Otherwise, I'm going to keep thinking you've got questions to ask. Much appreciated. We love technology. Okay, thank you very much, Carol. I think that report is noted. Thank you very much.
Don't we need to vote?
Yeah, are we voting on the principle? Sorry, Adrian.
I think we need to vote on 1 and 2. Don't
Okay, so I was reading on, sorry, 7.3 is a note, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of this, who is eligible to vote on this? Sue, run me through that.
All members for early years, I think. Yeah.
All members this. So if you agree, if you could just type into your message bar yes. If you disagree, if you type no, and if you abstain, if we can just write abstain, that would be great. So this is 7.1 to carry forward the underspending principle.
Oh no, I can't count.
Thank you for that. Okay, if we can move on to 7.2, and I can say I've made a tactical error here. So in for this one, if we agree to 7.2, if we could type into the bar 7.2 yes, 7.2 no, 7.2 abstain. Thank you. Thank you for your patience with that one. Excellent. Okay, thank you very much for that. And then 7.3 is just a note. Have we complied with the need there, Sue?
Yes, and it's all been agreed, but I will make sure that's clear in the minutes. It's quite hard counting them as they're coming through.
Always nice to hear somebody from the account section say it's hard to count.
Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Carol. Much appreciated.
Thank you, everybody.
If
Bye.
we then move on to item 6, thanks, Sue, which is the de-delegation of funds. And this is James. Christine, who's presenting this one? Sorry.
It's me, Adrian.
James, excellent. Welcome, James.
Evening, colleagues. My name's James Backhouse. I'm the Assistant Director for Education at Wirral Council. I'll introduce this paper, but there will be an additional person coming in to give comments on one part of it. Agenda item 6 is in relation to the de-delegated budget around behaviour support and school improvement for maintained schools. I'll take the paper as read by members of Forum, but just to outline the key points. The purpose is to provide an update to Forum on the services delivered through the de-delegated budgets. The recommendations in 3.2 is that primary Forum representatives agree to contribute the remaining 7/12 of funding from schools budget in relation to behaviour support and school improvement. And 3.3 is that secondary Forum representatives agree to contribute the remaining 7/12 of funding from school budgets for behaviour support and school improvement. This report is in response to additional information requested by Forum members where there were concerns around how the funds were being used and transparency. I will give the overview of part 2, which is in relation to school improvement. I will hand over to my colleague Anna Dollard from the local authority in relation to part 1, which is behaviour support. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, James. As James said, my name's Anna Dollard. I currently work as SEND manager for the local authority, but previously employed as the inclusion strategy manager, which pertains to the behaviour report that's been written for Schools Forum today, which I'll be commenting on. As James said, we'll take the report as read, but just wanted to highlight a few key parts of it in order for colleagues to be able to vote on the parts that James has already mentioned. So previously, while working as inclusion strategy manager coming into the local authority, the picture was that the exclusion rates on Wirral were quite high. Numbers are obviously demonstrated in the table that's embedded within the report. And the key roles of the inclusion strategy manager was to work with colleagues in schools to be able to try and reduce the numbers of permanent exclusions and produce a more inclusive ethos across the borough. As well as the numbers of pupils that had previously been permanently excluded and the desire to reduce those, there was a significant cohort of pupils that sat beneath those who were at risk of permanent exclusion. And the idea of the inclusion strategy manager position is to work with schools to try and prevent them from escalating to a point at which they have to be permanently excluded. As you can see from the figures in the table embedded within the report, there was significant amount of success in the collaborative approaches with the local authority and schools in managing to reduce the numbers of permanent exclusions. Even with taking COVID into account and the fact that that sort of equated to a term out of education for pupils in the last academic year, the figures up until that point were still showing a significant decrease in the numbers of pupils permanently excluded, resulting in less than half the amount at the end of the 1920 academic year to the previous year, which sort of bucked the trend of the rise that we'd seen over the years since 2012. So part of the inclusion strategy manager role is split really into an operational element and a strategic element. The operational element was providing that sort of direct response to schools on a daily basis in terms of pupils that they were struggling to manage due to a challenging behaviour, and providing the opportunities to attend meetings with schools, give advice and support, signpost to other agencies, liaising with other colleagues across other service areas, and working with head teachers to ensure that the wraparound packages for those pupils were in place. Alongside that was the more strategic element of the role, which was more focused on preventative measures. So in order for pupils not to become at risk of permanent exclusion, working very hard on early intervention and early identification of pupils' needs and making sure that the correct strategies are in place at that stage so that things do not escalate to the point at which schools feel they have no option but to permanently exclude. So working very much with colleagues in schools to make sure that the early signs of behavioural difficulties or issues are explored. Any underlying need that hasn't been met, there needs to be an exploration for that and directing colleagues towards those processes as well. In part of the strategic element of the role, I held a number of focus groups with head teachers to troubleshoot issues in terms of behaviour, We tried to gather more of a multi-agency approach to this, so working with our colleagues across social care and health as well to address the issues that education sometimes feel they're left with alone. So building and fostering those relationships, sort of cross-agency relationships, in order to put more wraparound packages and support for educational settings. Through these behaviour focus groups that were held, the overwhelming feeling was that schools were struggling particularly to manage with the behavioural challenges manifesting from early childhood trauma and attachment difficulties. And this was an area that schools felt that they weren't necessarily skilled up enough to be able to manage alone. So we're having to find other options for pupils who are demonstrating such challenging behaviour in schools because of experiences in their early lives. So in order to address that, listen to what colleagues were saying in schools and what potentially might be needed, and started exploring some options for how we could help support schools in this. So developed a partnership, sort of worked with colleagues at Chester University and developed and sort of produced and developed a partnership from scratch, really, to build a package of support for schools that we could deliver to them to skill them up in the areas that they felt they needed in terms of trauma and attachment. So that partnership with Chester University was a bespoke package of support for schools based on their need, and it was split into three very distinct areas, of which they are up and running and ongoing at the moment. The first area was a universal training offer for colleagues in schools. So the local authority has funded for up to 5,000 staff across Wirral, including any colleague who comes into direct contact with a pupil, be it teaching, non-teaching, caretaker, dinner staff, etc., to be able to access training to support them in how to manage pupils who display challenging behaviour that stems from trauma and attachment difficulties. That training is up and running at the moment and is due to come to the end at the end of May. There's been a number of sessions and a number of colleagues have signed up to that. The second part of the partnership with Chester University is based around completing audits with 25 partner schools who have applied to be part of this programme. The application process for that was overwhelming response from schools to want to be part of that, and that's just started as well. And the audits that have been conducted so far, of which I have been on a few, have been really, really successful. And the feedback from schools so far, they felt it's been really helpful in sort of showing them where on the journey towards being attachment and trauma informed they are and what they need to do in order to be able to progress that. And then the third part of the partnership with Chester University was to secure, for the local authority again, to fund and secure places for 15 colleagues across Wirral to access the PG Cert in trauma, attachment and mental health, which means that at the end of this year, we will have 15 colleagues across Wirral who have master's level qualification in trauma, attachment and mental health. And in that, we will have a hub, if you like, of expertise that we are then able to utilise for all of our schools across Wirral to be able to provide support and advice for schools in managing those particular children who are displaying those difficulties. So that partnership with Chester University is been a critical piece of work in addressing the sort of preventative things that we need to put into place to stop things from escalating to a point where pupils need to be excluded. Apart from that, on other, just things to mention very quickly in terms of what that role has provided. A key piece of work that's been reintroduced through the work of the inclusion strategy managers, the reintroduction of the Safer Schools police officers into schools, which was an initiative that had terminated a number of years ago. Working proactively with Merseyside Police to ensure that the uplift in police officers that they were receiving was partly used for this initiative. So providing Merseyside Police with the data and the information around what currently schools are facing and how we would need those officers back in schools. Following that through to the success of those being reintroduced into schools, and the feedback from schools has been that's been very welcome. Another key thing just to mention is the work and the partnership with Merseyside Violence Reduction Unit, who have offered a number of training activities and activities for pupils to access as well, particularly pupils who are at risk of permanent exclusion or pupils who are demonstrating challenging behaviour associated with violence and aggression, knife crime, etc. The partnership that we've developed with the Inclusion Strategy Manager role and Merseyside Violence Reduction Partnership has offered schools those opportunities that they wouldn't necessarily have had, and those have come fully funded in most of the things that they've been offered. So that's it really. Just to reiterate that the role of the Inclusion Strategy Manager is a dual role, and both of which have had impact on the pupils that we've got in schools who are currently at risk. So I'm not sure if there's any questions based on that part of the report.
Thanks, Anna. If we just pause for a moment, I know that there are a couple of questions already been submitted in regards to this. Simon, do you want to ask a question?
Well, actually, it was just to thank Anna, because of that. It's a really detailed report, and I just want to thank you for the work you've done supporting the maintained schools, and wish you every success in the SEN role.
Thanks, Simon. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Simon. I think there's much to be applauded in there. There is a caution, of course, in the data over the past 2 years when the schools have been closed for such a prolonged period, and we need to be mindful that some of those social pressures that cause those bubbles in exclusions are still there, and some of the families have struggled a lot. So we do have to be cautious when looking at that data. And there was a question about, is there a difference in access between maintained schools and academies in the way that this is provided, given that this is a de-delegated fund which is paid for by maintained schools? James, would you like to come to this at the end of this full report?
Yeah, I was going to say, if I do my update for part 2 on school improvement, and then I'll talk about some of the direction of travel moving forward.
Okay, that was just a tabled question, so we'll just pause that one for the moment.
Yep.
Simon, you've still got your hand up, Simon? Oh, no, you haven't. Yes, there we go. Excellent. So should we move on to part 2? Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. So to move on to part 2, which is in relation to school improvement, the report outlines the statutory duties that the local authority has in relation to school improvement. It also outlines some of the staff colleagues that are involved in that process and the costings. It also outlines what those statutory duties are in relation to moderation of teacher assessments in primary schools, appointing the relevant person for the assessment moderation, and having that across all key stages. It also gives an update into the relation to how that supports the early years arrangements and the monitoring and administration of the phonics assessment that takes place. Moving forward, as we go through the report, it also gives the other statutory duties that the local authority has responsibility in relation to schools causing concern guidance. There's a clear guidance around the local authority's responsibility to act as a champion of high standards, with the responsibility to maintain schools in their area, but also to share with any concerns in relation to academies with the Regional Schools Commissioner, if that's relevant. In addition, it outlines how funds should be used by the local authority to support their maintained schools in relation to school improvement and activities that can take place. In the report, it articulates the previous funding is being used to scrutinise school data and opportunities for CPD for school leaders and school colleagues. It also articulates where school-to-school partnership boards have been used to organise support through the school banding system, and also use a school improvement grant to deploy Wirral system leaders when needed for schools with specific support. Moving forward, it articulates that the released funds, the funds that have been requested through the de-delegated budget, would be to coordinate further CPD moving forward for this academic year and the next academic year, to provide a universal offer of support for the key stages across all schools as we recover from COVID-19. CPD for maintained secondary schools in developing problem solving and mathematics, and also to support maintained schools where they are requires improvement judgment and getting back to good or better. The intended impact would raise attainment across all LA maintained schools, diminish the gaps for pupils' learning, and also support secondary schools in developing their areas around problem solving and mathematics. The LA will continue to help, support and challenge our maintained schools and demonstrate this by improving offset outcomes and judgments around outcomes across our schools. Happy to take any questions and to pick up the other question around how de-delegated budgets are used for maintained in academies.
Thank you. Can I just echo what Simon said before about the quality of this report? This is really clear, and this is something we've been asking for, so thank you very much. But if we can kick off with the question that was tabled originally about the difference between support for maintained schools and academies.
Yep, thanks for that. Moving forward, what we will be doing is articulating our clear school improvement strategy and behaviour support for schools. There will be a clear offer that's articulated how maintained schools can access that, and funding will be put aside to secure brokerage when needed for maintained schools, but also to support thematic projects across the local authority. Maintained schools will have access to that. Academies can, but there may be a cost incurred for accessing that support. So moving forward, there'll be a change in how we offer school improvement and behaviour support for our academies versus our maintained schools, because academies receive that funding direct through their academy funding agreements with the Department for Education. So that will be a change in approach moving forward to articulate the supports in place for our maintained schools. In addition, we are liaising and speaking with our school leaders in our maintained schools around the specific needs that they feel are required as we recover from the pandemic to make sure that support is in place. So I know from speaking to colleagues, they're really, really keen to understand how they can develop their support around early years foundation stage. So we're exploring what support we can put on for that, but also looking at best practice and working with organisations like the EEF to look at the other support that we can bring in place around supporting young people returning to school after the pandemic. But there will be a different approach. And finally, we will be looking at the capacity of the teams at the local authority to make sure we've got what we need to support our maintained schools moving forward on that school improvement journey.
Thank you for that comprehensive response, James. Much appreciated. Simon?
Yeah, thank you, James, for that report. It really deals with the issues of transparency that were raised at the last meeting. It's a really detailed report. Thank you. I'd like to go back to this issue of equity, which is one that some of the maintained schools were raising. So maintained schools are paying, maintained secondaries are paying in, I think it's between £80,000 and £90,000 for this service, which is a valuable service. And I certainly recognise that I want my school to pay into a service that we may need at some point. And I think that's really valuable. Just on this issue of equity then, if what will happen to the monies that academies pay back to the local authority? Is there a way that money can be used to further support maintained schools so that we can have a little bit more equity? Because it appears that we're making the bigger financial commitment.
What I would say, Simon, is that the plans moving forward are based on what is needed for our maintained secondaries and primaries. So what we will be putting in place is based on the capacity for those and the support that they will require in relation to school improvement activities around thematic projects, but also brokered support if that's required around specific areas, and also in relation to quality insurance support. If academies would like to be involved in some of the processes the local authority and the activities local authority be involved in, that would give an additional capacity request. And so it may be that those funds are required to put additional resource in place, because what we're planning for is what maintained schools need. If academies also want to be involved in some of these activities, that would be an additional capacity needed from the local authority perspective. So our plans moving forward are what's needed for maintained schools. If there is the vast majority of academies on Wirral want to also be involved in that, we'd look at where our capacity is and if we need to put additional resources in place. But I would also say, Simon, which I think is really important moving forward, there will be openness and transparency in how funds are used from our de-delegated budgets and our brokerage and support grant. And I think that's really, really important that moving forward, you get sight of how our funds in this area are being used, because ultimately it is for maintained schools. So they will be open to challenge around that.
Thank you, James.
Does that answer your question? I think it would be difficult to use the money that came from academies to pay back into any accounts of any schools, Simon. If you were hoping for that, I don't think we have.
Yeah, I understand, and thank you for that answer, James. I'm happy with that.
Brilliant, excellent. Thank you, James. Okay, so we move on now that we, Sue, if I'm right in this, we have to agree an action for the 7/12 that will not be a de-delegation, it will be a distribution of charges. Is that correct?
That's right. Because obviously the budgets are already out there, we will have to charge for the 7/12 rather than it reducing their budget allocation. So that'll be done as long as it's agreed. But for the voting, it'll be only primary reps can vote for the primary, and only secondary reps can vote for the secondary. Okay,
so I've got a question from Liz.
Hi, sorry, yeah, Liz Davidson. I'm representing the Bevington-Bromborough head teachers. Just thinking, do we have a figure on how much the contribution is going to be?
Yes, it will be the figure that was originally put out in the previous forum. I don't know if you have that to hand, Sue.
I don't have it to hand, but on your budget allocation sheet, you'll have an amount deducted for the April to August amount, and sort of it's the other 7/12. That's 5/12. So you would be looking at that as a 7/12. I think for the primary schools, I don't think it's very big for either behaviour support or for each primary school. I don't think it is a big amount, but I don't know the figures off the top of my head now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, Liz. Is there?
Can I just come in, Adrian?
You certainly can, James.
I can't give you the specific school amounts, Liz, but what I can say was the original budget allocation for behaviour support was 104,000, and for school improvement it was 149,000. The 5/12 was agreed in January forum of 58,000 for behaviour support, and school improvement was 62,000. I'd have to do the maths, but it would be the difference between those two numbers, which I'm happy to share after the meeting.
I think what we can do, Sue, I think if you just pull those figures from the previous meeting when we illustrate the difference between the 5 and the 7/12, I think that maths has already been done, James. So
yeah,
that I think, can we just put that in with the minutes, Sue?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm happy to also let the schools know the amount, their individual amounts before we do any journals anyway.
Does that satisfy everybody's needs if we can move on to voting? Okay, so in the first vote, which is 3.2.1a, for behaviour support for primaries, this vote is only for primary representatives.
Yeah.
So if you could write in the chat box 3.2.1a, yes or no or abstain. If we can do that now, that would be great. I know it's an ask. Okay, and similarly, sorry, just wait for the beeps to stop. And similarly, for 3.2.1b, which is the contribution to school improvement, if we can do the same, 3.2.1b, yes, abstain or no, that would be great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much for that, everybody. Sue, have you managed to get that? That looked like a yes for both to me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, and then for item 3.3, which is a much easier one to count because it's Simon. Simon, could you just, for the sake of the minute, please give us a 3.3.1A, yes, no, or abstain, and a 3.1B, yes, no, or abstain. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so that would appear that we have an agreement to fund the school improvement and behaviour support services for the next academic year. And if I could say to those responsible for areas of those budgets, if we can keep those reports really clear and regular, we'll be in a better position moving forward. But I absolutely thank you for those. That's really been helpful today. Okay, so if we can move on now to item 7, which is the DSG, and I think that is Christine, is that right? No?
It'll be me, Adrian, picking up agenda item 7 in Mark Williams' absence.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I've skipped on to the wrong one. Yes, thank you, James.
Okay, so agenda item 7 is a report in relation to the dedicated schools grant management plan. I will take the report as read, but we'll pick up the key lines from this report. The purpose of this report is to provide an update to Forum on Wirral's dedicated school grant management plan. We are asked that Schools Forum note the draft plan in Appendix A. The key areas I'd like to bring to people's attention was that initially a piece of work took place by Mark Williams as a strategic advisor. He was convened to look at a workshop approach for co-production in the proposals that are articulated within this report. The work was initially commissioned due to a forecasted deficit of £2.7 million in the DSG. The original intention was the period of co-production would be completed by the end of March. However, the period of co-production will now begin in the summer term of 2021 and fall into 2 phases. Phase 1 will be a review of action planning. The delay was to allow for best channels of communication and participation to be found. Moving forward, what we're looking to do in this piece of work is to look at the capacity to spend in the previous years, also to look at the comparison span with other local authorities and the recommendations going forward. So that work was undertaken by Mark Williams since before Christmas until March to really have an understanding as to what activity was taking place in the DSG. From his work with school leaders and other partner organisations, moving forward, the following recommendations have taken place for a DSG management plan. We want to make sure that the key recommendations are followed around clarity to all stakeholders to ensure confidence in the process through a DSG management plan. As part of the review of services in DSG, a clear evaluation of the high needs block. And finally, clarity on how funding should be released across schools and services to make sure that it supports our young people in being able to access an education that helps them to thrive and succeed. Moving forward, we want to gain the views of different partners and stakeholders identified in point 20 of the report. Emerging priorities have been discussed, developing an inclusive system which meets the needs of children and young people and families, set outcomes that are measured by impact, make sure that we have sufficiency in the system in relation to school places, but also for children with SEND. Make sure the impacts of transitions are documented on children and young people, and make sure the voice of the child is the most important in the work that takes place. You will see them in the report. There are key dates moving forward for putting this DSG management plan together, starting from the 13th of April and continuing on until conclusion by the 11th of July. The monitoring and reporting arrangements of the strategic advisor will provide updates on progress fortnightly to the DCS and the Assistant Director of Education at each Schools Forum meeting as required and to wider partners by invitation. I'm happy to take questions on the DSG Management Plan report and the work that's already been undertaken by that strategic advisor. Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks, James. Okay. Again, thank you for the clarity and the brevity of that report. That's much appreciated. Do we have any questions from the floor in regard to this? No. Would this be something that the high needs working group would like to comment upon if we have a meeting coming up? Shall we delegate it to that body to come back?
It does make clear in the recommendations, Adrian, that there will be a clear evaluation of high needs block and how that spending is used.
Yeah, excellent. In that case, thank you, James. That was much appreciated. If we have no further questions, can we move on then to item 9, which is the schools balances? And can we note that report as well? Thank you. The budget outturn. Sorry, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, this one is Christine.
It is, thank you. My name's Christine Thompson. I'm a Senior Finance Business Partner supporting colleagues and services delivering education and schools. The Outturn report that has been presented before you, this is the third or fourth in a series of reports that we've been producing throughout the financial year. I have to say, although we've reached the end of the financial year, the report is still provisional at this time because, like all of Wirral's accounts, it's subject to the external audit process. The overall outturn for financial year 2021 is showing a total overspend on DSG of £414,000, mainly due to pressure in the high needs block. This does actually, though, represent an improvement of 644k from the position that we actually reported to the January forum, which is mainly due to an underspend in early years and an improvement in the high needs position of 258k. If you wouldn't mind just moving down a bit, Sue, we'll just sort of have a look at this overall table in paragraph 1.3. And this just gives a summary of the under and overspends in each of the funding blocks for the DSG. So we can see that the biggest overspend, the gross overspend, is in the high needs block, almost 1.4 million. We have got an underspend on the early years block. However, that needs to be dealt with, looked at in conjunction with the shortfall of income on DSG. And I'll explain that in a bit more detail when I'll come to the early years section of the report. We had set aside some funding of £644,000 out of the high needs block, which means that our net overspend for the year is £414,000. And the little table below that is just showing the position on high needs, because although we have that gross overspend of almost 1.4 million, as I say, the amount of funding that we thought we were going to set aside to contribute to the overall reserve was from the high needs block. That gives us a net overspend on high needs of 729,000. The impact of that £414,000 overspend in year means that we started the year with a deficit DSG balance of 1,264,000. So with the in-year overspend of 414,000, it means we're actually starting next financial year 21-22 with a cumulative deficit on the DSG reserve of £1,678,000. What I'll do is most of the variances that I'm going to highlight, I'll deal with in the appendix. But before we move to the appendix, if I could just do a bit of an overview of the early years. And that, Sue, is on the table on page 46 under section paragraph 5.1. And this ties in with Carol's early years reports, which she presented earlier. The way that early years works is that our funding, our DSG funding, is based on the January census, and it's based partly on the January 20 census and partly on January 21 census. And because the DFE actually finalised that information after the end of the financial year, we still haven't yet had confirmed what our final DSG funding is going to be for early years. But the table you've got here, what this does is it takes into account what we think assessed that the final grant income is going to be for early years, which is less than the budget, because our census information for January 21 has reduced from January 20. So this just outlines the underspend of the £290,400 that Carol actually referred to in her report. If you can just move on to Appendix 1, because it's probably just give members of the forum just enable me to explain just sort of in one go the main variances. So just looking at the individual schools budget, we have an underspend on special schools of just over £300,000. At the January meeting, we were reporting that as £200,000. And the reason for that is that we included in the budget for 2021 some additional places for special schools, but not all of those have actually been allocated during the current financial year. And those that weren't allocated for a full year. So it means we've got an underspend in that area. You'll see on the early years, we're showing a large underspend of £500,000. But as I say, that is offset by the shortfall in grant income, which is displayed further down in the report. Because as I say, the grant income has been adjusted to reflect what we think the income's going to be, but it is subject to final approval from ESFA, which will be towards middle to the end of June. Just moving down onto the central schools. Biggest underspend there is the £62,000, which Carol has referred to in her report relating to the early years central costs. Admissions, a small underspend, which is mainly due to short-term part-time vacancies. Just moving down onto the de-delegated block. And the main underspend there is on the contingencies of £82,000. And the main reason for that is that within that contingencies budget, the biggest element of that is it takes account of the difference between the funding that's included in schools' budgets to meet the cost of business rates and the actual cost of business rates. Because at the time that we set the schools' budgets, the actual business rates have not been confirmed. And this year, the actual business rates were less than was included in the schools' budgets. So that's generated quite a significant underspend. And the overspend on special staff costs of £54,000, again, that relates to a maternity and paternity costs, which do fluctuate quite significantly year on year. Just moving down to the high needs block. And that's where we have our significant overspends. We have been reporting these headings as overspends throughout the year, and it is mainly due to pressure, even in an increased demand, either relating to higher numbers or complexity of the support that we've needed to provide to pupils. And most of that pressure and demand is going to continue into 21-22. Hence, we've significantly increased the budget for those areas in high needs. The areas where we have had a bit of an improvement is on the home tuition service, where the overspend has reduced, mainly because we got some additional recharge income at the end of the year. And also on our support for SEN, where again there was some additional recharge income at the end of the financial year, but also we've been setting aside some funding for a potential pension liability, but that is now that additional funding has been released because we are now actually going to the pension pressure that's been identified will be dealt with in the next triennial review from the pension fund, and therefore will be passed on if there is any impact in the actual employer's percentage. Just moving down a little bit now into the funding element, where we have a shortfall on the dedicated schools grant, and that is made up of two areas. One area, all relating to early years, but part of that is because in the prior year we had to make an assessment of what we thought the final grant income would be for early years, and the actual adjustment for early years ended up in they clawed back some grant rather than giving us more grant. This year, as I've said before, because the January census numbers for 21 are lower than 20, we've actually made a judgment that there will be some grant income to claw back, but that final grant income figure will be confirmed by ESFA later in the year, probably June. If I can just ask you, Sue, just to go back to the recommendations in the report. As identified in Carol's report, what we wanted to do was to carry forward the underspend on the early years. So in these recommendations, and I think actually, Chair, we've probably already had the vote on these with Carol's paper, is that the areas that we want to ring fence or carry forward for early years is the Disability Access Fund of £223,000, and that is made up of the cumulative underspend on the Disability Access Fund of £178,000 plus the £45,000 underspend this year. And as Carol's identified, we've already committed £176,000 of that in the new financial year. And then the remainder of the unspent early years grant of £245,000. And again, I've mentioned that's to be confirmed, because once the ESFA have confirmed our grant and we can confirm the value of that underspend, I think what we did agree was that we would come back to Schools Forum to report what the actual value was. And I think, say, based on Carol's report, Forum have already agreed in principle to carry forward and ring fence that funding for early years. That's the end of the areas of the report that I wanted to focus on, but happy to take any questions from members of the Forum.
Hi, Christine. Yeah, thank you for that. I think we've already agreed in principle, haven't we, in Carol's piece, those figures. Going back through those spreadsheets, there are still some eye-watering figures there, aren't there? And there is a question about the sustainability of that deficit that we'll have to address at some stage, because we can't continually overspend. It would be remiss of us not to challenge that, wouldn't it? Yeah. So that's something we need to look at the budgets. Has anybody got any questions before we note this report for Christine at this time? We're all too busy wiping the tears from our eyes after looking at those figures, aren't we? Okay, thank you very much again, Christine. Those lovely and clear reports as ever. Any more questions before we note that report? Okay, thank you very much. So if we can then move on to item, where are we? Item 10 now. 9. I've completely lost count, which is still you, Christine.
It is indeed. Thank you, Chair. This is just to report a bit of an update on the 21-22 schools budget. January Forum, we put forward the proposed budget for 21-22. And the actions that have happened to make change for us needed to change that budget since then are we've now had the academy recoupment confirmed. So we've actually reduced the budget for schools by £111,695,000, which is the element of the budget which relates to academies. The de-delegation, which was agreed at the January meeting, is that we have transferred £1,560,000 from schools' budgets down to de-delegation, to the de-delegated block, but that does only reflect the 5/12 that was agreed for school improvement and behaviour support. When we actually set the budget, we took into account the information for the feedback from schools when we did the consultation in September and October, where we asked for feedback on the minimum funding guarantee, and the overwhelming consensus of our schools was that we want to set a minimum funding guarantee of 1.25%. And if there was any headroom left in the schools grant after applying that minimum funding guarantee, that would be set aside for a falling roles and growth fund. So having now got the final schools grant and applying the national funding formula and the 1.25% minimum funding guarantee, that has actually left headroom of £152,900, which is now the value of the falling roles and growth fund, which is significantly less than the fund we had for 2021, which was nearer £600,000. The only other small change that has been made since the January Forum when we presented the budget is that the funding formula now includes the teachers' pay grants and the teachers' pension employers' contributions grant. And there's just been a small movement of an element of that grant in the high needs block between the home tuition service and the support for SEN, and that really just reflects where those particular staff are aligned to in those budgets. If you wouldn't mind just moving to Appendix 1, Sue, thank you. And this summary here just identifies the differences in the grant, and as I say, I've just outlined what the differences in the budget since the January forum, and I've just highlighted those 4 changes to the budget. So I'm just asking forum to note this report and changes to the budget, but I'm happy to take any questions about the budget.
Thanks, Christine. I think we had a question about the allocation of the growth and falling roles budget as we move forward. So last year we agreed a set of principles and protocols around the allocation of that budget. This year we were anticipating the budget being a lot smaller, weren't we? Even though it's bigger than we originally anticipated, it is still quite a small budget. There was a feeling expressed by some members of Forum that we might want to go back to that set of rationale for distribution of that funds. If so, we could do with bringing that back to a Forum meeting where we could have an example. Would that be possible, Christine, to bring back to that distribution method to a future meeting?
Yes, I think I'd be happy to bring that back to the June meeting so we can look at what the distribution would be based on the criteria that we use for 2021 and maybe some alternative criteria as well, just so that Forum can see what difference the impact would be.
Is that, am I pulling the string in the right direction from what was expressed to me prior to the meeting? Simon?
Yeah, I'd support us having another look at that perhaps in the next Forum meeting. That would be good.
Okay, Christine, can we put that as an action from there? That would be really helpful.
Yes. Yeah.
Other than that, have we got any questions for Christine over that item? It is as clear as daylight, Christine. Thank you as ever for your clarity. Brilliant. So we can note that report. And then if we move on to, if I got my numbers right, now we've got to item number 10, which is the balances, which I think is Sue.
Oh, I've got to juggle everything. Right. So this report advises the Forum on the school balances as at the 31st of March 2021. I've done a small piece on the increase in the balances and also looking at the schools that are in deficit. So as we can see from this table, the balances have increased by 5.6 million since March 2020. From 7.9 million to 13.5 million. We've adjusted it for one academy that converted partway through the year so that we take that out of the equation, so we're comparing like with like. Although the balances have increased, we still have 11 schools that ended the year with a deficit. However, this is compared to 21 in the 1920 financial year, so that is a good improvement. 3 of these schools are new to deficit budget, so we'll be working with them to set and agree a licensed deficit plan to then come back into balance. 2 of them are working through licensed deficits at the moment, and 2 schools are working with the schools to agree licensed deficits. We've also got sorry, I've lost me. I'm trying to do too many things. There it is. We have two schools that remain in a notice of concern category, and we'll continue to work with those schools, and we have 2 schools who regularly finish the year with a deficit budget, but then they set a balanced budget, so that we will then we'll monitor those closely to make sure that we try and understand why that happens sort of all the time. However, it does mean that their deficit balances aren't really large. So I thought it would be useful to look at the increase in balances, because it's probably one of the largest increase in balances I've seen in the time that I've been doing this role. And also, you know, earlier in the sort of like, or late last year, when we were concerned about the cost of COVID, and we were looking at the additional cost COVID brought, it's interesting to see that the balances have actually increased. But we can see from the table here, unfortunately I can't show it all on the screen, but I've split it. Trouble controlling it. I've split it between primary, secondary, special and nursery schools, so that we can get an indication of where the biggest changes are. But as we can see, the biggest increase in balances is in the primary sector, but we have you know, far more schools in that sector, which probably makes it look bigger. If I can look at the grants first, overall, when we look at the grants, we can see I split the grants out between grants and DSG and other income, so that we could identify what was grants funded and where we've got parental income. So we can see that in I think all the sectors, if I can scroll down slowly, that with the exception of the nursery schools, all the schools gained under the grants and DSG section, and the majority and the main reasons for that was because we had a full year of teachers' pension grants being added in. So basically what I've done is I've compared the 2021 budget with the 1920 budget, so that we get a comparison to the previous year. So basically we had a full year of the teachers' pay and pension grant. We had 4.6 million of dedicated schools grant, because we had additional funding going into the budgets for primary and secondary schools. And we also had over £2 million worth of COVID grants over all the sectors. So this additional funding has been offset this year by the reduction in other income, and that's mainly around parental income and school trips, where obviously there hasn't been the collection of those funds, because schools haven't been in, or they haven't been able to offer sort of out of school, out of before and after school club services, or being able to get any rental from any of their services. So we can see that there's a reduction under that other income that would normally come into schools. If I can then just nip back to the salaries. So what the grant showed was that some of it is COVID related and some of the changes aren't COVID related. What we can see with the employees is that we've got additional costs in all areas for the employees, and again, that's also a full year effect of the teachers' pension grant, because it started in September 19. So in the 1920 financial year, we only had a 7/12 effect, and we had a 12/12 effect, and the other changes in that are pay awards and incremental rises up the scales. The main other areas that had big savings are the supplies and services in all the sectors. So the supplies and services were where schools couldn't get people in, or they didn't pay for trips, and so there was sort of like a big reduction in those costs, and also the meals were also included in those areas. However, what this doesn't show is that within those areas there were additional costs for cleaning and the purchasing of ICT, which were very obviously COVID pressures. But unfortunately, that doesn't show through in the figures that we've got. So I've written sort of quite big explanations for those. And then if I can just go to the monitoring of the balances. So moving forward, we will continue to monitor the budget, because the budgets for 21, 22 and 22, 23 are still starting to show continuing schools to go into deficits. So we will continue to monitor those. However, with the additional balances, this hope for some schools, this will hopefully be a lot better to manage. And just a quick note on sort of like some of the things that we've been doing. So we're continually working with schools, reviewing their staffing levels to make sure that they don't go into deficit positions. And going forward, we'll be working closely with schools who can't set their budgets this year. We're currently working on that at the moment, and for any schools who can't set balances, and where they can't agree a licence deficit, we'll be looking at a notice of concern and reviewing those on a regular basis to ensure they're meeting those plans. Any questions?
Thank you, Sue. So can I ask one, and this may be to you, Sue, or to James, perhaps. So schools that are struggling to set balanced budgets or to show a recovery plan, do they come in for support from the School Improvement Service?
That's definitely something we'd look as an option to support with. I've been meeting with finance colleagues around how we can support schools where budget is becoming a challenge. And moving forward, it will be an area where we will look into support schools in how best ways forward are to get to balanced budget positions. And there definitely will be support available for those schools. And we'll be making contact in the fullness of time. Now we've got clearness on where school budgets have closed.
Excellent, thank you. And I think that we all need to recognise how hard schools have been working to balance their budgets in such challenging times. We've never had a couple of years like we've experienced at the moment. So I think we should express our thanks to everybody who's been working in that sector, in all of the schools that are represented, and all the sectors are represented as well. So thank you for that, Sue.
Has Simon got a question?
I haven't got
or is that from earlier?
I haven't got a hand up.
Simon Goodwin, I've got a note that he's got his hand up. No, is it just on my screen?
Yeah,
How weird.
It looks like your screen is frozen, Sue, perhaps.
Oh, no, look, no, I'm moving.
No,
Okay.
Simon hasn't got his hand up. So thank you very much for that, Sue. Can we note that report? And obviously the balances will continue to be monitored. Okay, so the next agenda item is updates. That's just a quick summary, Sue.
Yeah, I've included a copy of the schools forum operational guidance practice, because there's been a minor change, and that change is that they've now changed the regulations so that school forums can meet it's a permanent provision to enable school forums to meet remotely. So one of the discussions we need to have at some point is whether we continue to hold remotely through Teams, or we look at alternatives, going back to meeting together.
So could we canvass that outside of this meeting? So could we write to all forum members and see how they feel, and if they have a strong feeling about remaining online, or a strong feeling about getting back together, or they maybe prefer to do alternate meetings each? So could we canvass opinion and bring it back to the next forum meeting to see where that leaves us?
Yeah. I am aware at the moment that the councillors are going back to meetings, but they are, I think they are meeting at the Floral Pavilion rather than Wallasey Town Hall. So I don't know how that would fit in at the moment, because we would normally meet at Wallasey Town Hall, and I'm not aware of when or if that's due to reopen.
James may have a comment on that.
Yeah, I'm just liaising with Democratic Services around the best way forward for Schools Forum. To me, I think it's a good idea to go out to Schools Forum members to see the best way forward in their opinion around what model fits best. But I am having them conversations about the appropriate space for this meeting to take place if it does in person.
Yeah, thank you, James. I think there's we need to see how people feel, but we also need to keep our eye on what's happening in relation to mass gatherings et al. So if that can be an item that we can discuss next meeting, Sue, we'd probably be clearer then, won't we?
That's fine.
Fantastic. And finally then, can we have a look at the work plan? Is there anything in the work plan that we need to bring to everybody's attention? Sue? Okay, so if we can have a look at that.
I think we need to review putting on the reviews of the school improvement and behaviour support as a how often they're going to be added on, and we'll probably need to add those on at some point, so I can have that discussion sort of outside of the meeting if that helps.
I think that would help. It's difficult to get to the bottom of such things in a meeting. Working groups. There
isn't currently a high needs working group planning to meet, as far as I'm aware. So I don't know whether that needs to be set up.
I'm conscious that would be something that we probably need to set up with Tara and James, and I could probably get together, and if we can try and organise a date and then circulate that around the membership. James?
I think it'd be good to try and fit that within the timeline that's being shared in the DSG Management Plan, so that fits in the right place so we get that co-production approach.
Absolutely. I think it's quite important that we meet certainly before the summer, I would have thought. So if the three of us could liaise with that and then get it out to the membership, that would be great. Anything else from that, Sue?
Not as far as I'm aware.
Any comments from anybody? No. Excellent. In which case, we have no notified any other business to my knowledge. Sue, is there any that we've been notified of?
I've not had any other business, no.
No. Has anybody got any closing comments? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your presence this afternoon. It's been a wonderful meeting. And thank you to all of the presenters and for everybody who contributes to that meeting. So thank you. And the date of next meeting, Sue, is in the diary for June.
It's on the top of it. The 29th of June.
The 29th of June. So, and we will continue that as an online meeting, given that we haven't had any indication of any change to that in this present time. I think that would be the sensible thing to do. Okay.
And at that meeting, we'll discuss I'll put the similar dates going forward for the next academic year for discussion at the next
Absolutely.
meeting.
And we can discuss not only that calendar, but also how we would like those meetings to be they physical or online.
Okey-doke.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Good evening. You take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks. Bye.
Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Adrian.
Cheers, Sue. That was nice and smooth. So did we get all of those